Okay, so today we're tackling a hugely important unit for your AP exam. Unit 5, the Age of Revolutions. From 1750 to 1900, the world was just completely turned upside down by new ideas, new machines, and new nations. These are the changes that directly created the very world you and I are living in right now. So let's jump right in.
And when I say important, I am not kidding. You really need to listen up here because this single unit accounts for 12 to 15% of your entire AP exam score. Think about that for a second. That's a huge chunk of your final grade coming from just this unit. So yeah, knowing this stuff cold, that's going to give you a serious edge. Really, this entire unit comes down to one big question. It's the story of two giant revolutions that were totally tangled up with each other, happening all at once. One revolution was happening in people's minds, about rights, about who gets to be in charge. And the other, it was a revolution in how we made, well, pretty much everything. But here's the thing. Before any of that could happen, before a single shot was fired or a single factory was built, there had to be a revolution in the way people thought. You can't have a fire without a spark, right? And that spark, the intellectual fuel for all the chaos and change that was about to come, that was the Enlightenment. It all started with this really simple but game-changing idea. Enlightenment thinkers, they looked at the scientific revolution, where people were using logic and reason to figure out how the planet works, and they thought, hey, why can't we do that for, people, for society and government? This idea, rationalism, became their #1 tool, just using pure reason to question absolutely everything.
And you can probably guess what happened when they pointed that tool, reason, at government. Boom, you get these explosive new ideas. The biggest one, the one you absolutely have to know, is natural rights, championed by a guy named John Locke. He argued that you are born with rights, period. They aren't a gift from a king, they're just part of being human. You can see how this completely pulls the rug out from under the whole idea of monarchs.
And okay, follow the logic here, because this is where it gets really wild. If you're born with rights, then what's the whole point of a government? Well, its only legitimate job is to protect those rights. That's it. And if it fails, if it starts stepping on your rights and becomes a tyrant, then the people have the right to get rid of it. I mean, this is literally the philosophical green light for revolution.
This whole thing gets wrapped up in an idea called the social contract. The big takeaway? Government isn't some divine thing handed down by God. No, it's a deal. It's an agreement among people. We agree to give up a tiny bit of our total freedom in exchange for protection and order from a government that we create. But, and this is the key, its power only comes from us, from the consent of the governed.
So these ideas sound great, right? But they weren't just sitting around in books or being debated in fancy coffee shops. No way. These were like ideological bombs, and they were about to set the entire Atlantic world on fire, sparking actual revolutions and creating a powerful new force. Nationalism.
And you can see this domino effect all across the Atlantic. In America, colonists used these exact ideas to say, hey, you're violating our natural rights, and reject British rule. In France, citizens looked at their own king and said, you broke the social contract, and they overthrow the entire monarchy. And then, and this is so important, in Haiti, enslaved people heard all this talk about liberty, took it to its absolute logical conclusion, and rose up to create the very first free black republic.
So what happens when you get huge groups of people fighting together for these new ideals? Well, they start to see themselves as a team, as a people, and this creates a brand new, incredibly powerful identity, nationalism. It's this feeling that you're united by a common language or culture and that your group should have its own country to rule yourselves. This idea was a wrecking ball. It built up new countries like Germany and Italy and smashed old empires apart. Okay. So remember how I said there were two revolutions happening at once? Well, while all these political fires were raging, a different kind of revolution was starting to smolder over in Great Britain. This was the engine of economic change that would literally, physically reshape the entire planet, the Industrial Revolution.
So you gotta ask, why Britain? Why there? Well, it was kind of like the perfect recipe, a perfect storm of factors. First, geography. Britain was just sitting on piles of coal and iron, and it had rivers everywhere for power. Second, its empire gave it access to raw materials from all over the world, plus a built-in customer base to sell to. And finally, an agricultural revolution freed up a ton of people to go work in factories, and there was a lot of capital, money to invest, from trade. Now, this revolution didn't happen all at once. It really came in two big waves. The first one is the one you probably picture,
Coal, steam power, iron, and textiles. Think classic steam engines and railroads. But then the second wave hits, and it's like a massive tech upgrade. Now we're talking about oil and electricity, building with steel, and creating a truly connected global network with things like the telegraph.
So, let's put it all together. You've got this political revolution based on rights and this industrial revolution based on machines, and they're happening at the same time and crashing into each other. The result? A completely new world. I mean, everything changed. How society was structured, how we thought about money, and who had power in the world.
This new industrial economy sparked a huge debate about how it should even work. In one corner, you've got Adam Smith and capitalism. His big idea was laissez-faire, basically hands-off. He said the government should just get out of the way, and the invisible hand of the market would create wealth. But in the other corner, you have Karl Marx. He saw this system as pure exploitation and predicted that eventually the workers would rise up in a revolution and create a classless, communist society.
Industrialization also completely redrew the social map. The old world of nobles and peasants was replaced. At the very top, you had a tiny new class of super wealthy factory owners. Then a new, growing middle class of managers and professionals emerged. And at the bottom was the massive new industrial working class, the people actually working in the factories and mines.
Now, life for that new working class was often brutal. So naturally, people started to push back. Workers formed labor unions to fight for better wages and safer conditions. Citizens pushed governments for social reforms, like modern sanitation. And movements for more voting rights and feminism used the very logic of the Enlightenment to say, hey, that applies to us too, and demand their seat at the table.
On a global scale, this new industrial power wasn't shared equally. Not even close. It created a massive imbalance. A handful of nations in Western Europe and North America became the world's manufacturers, while the rest of the world was increasingly forced into the role of supplying cheap raw materials, often through the brutal system of colonialism.
And that leaves us with this final thought. The debates that started back in this revolutionary era, about who gets rights, what the purpose of government is, how we should manage the power of technology, think about it. Those are the very same debates we're still having right now, today. The world of 1750 to 1900 isn't just history, it's the foundation of our modern world.